I was a third grade teacher, and it was the first teaching job I ever had, and the kids were running all over me. And my only chance of sort of catching a breath was after lunch and reading hour. I remember when I was a child during that after lunch, 15 minutes of silent reading, SSR, if that's not dating myself too much. But sustained silent reading, I mean, that was just like my dream time during the day. So I figured, okay, these kids, we're gonna do it. 15 minutes, quiet reading, I'm gonna read them a book, they'll shut up, and all will be well with the world. And I tried to read them books that I found absolutely amazing, that I loved. I'm like, you're gonna love this book, it's amazing, it's just great. And they would sit still for all of 2 seconds and then they'd start fidgeting. And then one day, one of my most behaviorally challenged students came up to me and was like, Miss, can you read this book? And I look at it, there's like zombies and guts flying everywhere. I'm like, oh my God, okay, but will you be quiet if I read it? He's like, oh, we'll be great, we'll be fine, we'll be absolutely perfect, just please read this book. So I'm like, okay, but just don't tell your parents. Nobody tell their parents. So I start reading the book, and those kids for the next 15 minutes did not move. I mean, they just didn't move. The little girls who I thought they were going to be in tears by the end, they were just, eyes were huge, they were, in the front of their chair, and I was like, I can't believe this. I'm like, but you still can't tell your parents. So it sort of started my search for books that they loved. I mean, it was definitely around a theme. I was like, okay, they like scary stuff, what can I find that's acceptable? And then I just started digging everywhere, asking everyone. And I think when you know what a child is passionate about,
right,
you can go down a rabbit hole. You can and just ask people, and they'll tell you, "Oh, you've got to read this book." People will always have these wonderful, wonderful recommendations, and you just dig through until you find things that speak to your child. And if you start that search based on their passion, you're going to find something. They're going to find something. You put it in their hands, and they'll just light them up. So that's really. I guess I'll just leave you with that. Like, if you just start with what they're passionate about and dig. And now with the internet, you can find sites, you can find things that are so interestingly. Like, I look for books that have kind of sparked fan art. If kids are passionate enough to create fan art on some sort of book, there's something there. And so I'll sort of dig there. Kids that are, I don't know, I kind of listen to them and see what they're looking at. And if I don't exactly think that might be the most appropriate thing, I look for other things that are around that are similar that might work as well. But in addition to the newspaper recommendations, all of that, that's great. But just start with what they're passionate about.
I agree with that completely, and I think one thing to remember, the problem with the bestseller list or any such thing is it's an average, right? It does not represent the great variety of kids and their interests. As I always say, there are kids who are in a chess club. What they want to read is chess books, because what is pleasure to them is learning a set of moves. And I think it's just to widen your eyes to what my kids want to do or to be interested in. I did want to mention one thing about when you were talking about going to museum shops. One of the great things about going to Bologna is to see how publishers in different countries experiment with format. The standard format of a picture book is 32 pages, right? But when you go to Bologna, one thing I loved was a French publisher which published a book like this. It was in 4 parts. It was not like this, it was like this. And you read it like this and like that. And you realize, why not? Other books which read this way, not this way. Or read in variations of pages. And you realize that the physicality of a book creates so many options. And the restriction, it is possibility. And so one thing to look for is books that experiment, books that try something different, and that in that way create possibility. I would say on that front, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl is the reverse of the Fault in Our Stars. It is a cancer book in which you take The Fault in Our Stars and add a minus sign. It is, to my eyes, hilariously funny, really in some ways depressing, and very honest. But it is a book that takes every beat of what you expect to happen in a boy-girl teenage cancer story and doesn't do that. Such that at points the author will say, at this point in a book like this, you will expect that, I will have some global revelation about what life really means and what we should understand in life, but it's not going to happen here. And I just love the humor, and that's the other thing I should add as a category. There's nothing more needed for teenagers than humor. And I think that is a very neglected category. It never wins prizes. And it is probably to some extent variant by culture, but who doesn't need to laugh when you're under stress from school, parents, relationships, whatever. And so I think one thing to look for are genre books that may not either be associated with doing tremendously well in school or extremely popular, but offer something that you might want, a relief.
I definitely agree with that. Humor is one that very rarely gets prizes, and horror for little kids that's one that doesn't. It's always left off the 100 bestseller list. Horror, but kids, I would say boys, but I don't even think girls. They eat it up, and you can find authors that do really good horror. So if you have a reluctant reader,
I agree.
You put that in their hands, and genre fiction is a really great resource, a great sort of go-to for finding good books.
My anecdotal story is about horror, and it's not really a story, but an author who came to us for a visit, Adam Gidwitz, who rewrote some of the Grimm's fairy tales, and girls and boys eat it up. They love it, and their parents sometimes say, "Take this back, Celeste. Why did you give this to my kid?" And then they come in and ask for the second book because they've read it in secret, and they love it. So talking about passions, Tioka mentioned that, and I just like to follow up because I think we have some professionals here who work with children as well as parents, and I wanted to ask how much or how little do you think your tastes should affect your selections as you're choosing books for your own children or the children you work with, and how you can use your taste to help you choose books that may appeal to them if you do use your personal preferences. Maybe we can go.
Because I was thinking about this, and it sort of made me giggle because kids are so clever and smart, and they know when they get a book from grandma, it's going to be this type of book. And when they get a book from their aunt, it's going to be this type of book. And when they sneak into their other aunt's room and pull a book off the shelf, it's going to be this type of book. And so I always feel like when you're trying to guide the kid, the child, and they're reading, they're looking back at you with these eyes and like, yeah, okay, I know what you're giving me.
Right.
So
That's true.
it's uncanny. So you have to be honest, and the kids will see it. And again, I would just really strongly go back to listening to that child and seeing where they sort of direct the conversation. And they will, I feel like they'll sort of naturally weed out what you're telling them. Like they'll know, okay, this is a book that my teacher likes, and so, okay, I'll read it, but they might read it reluctantly. Whereas if one of their friends tells them, oh, this is a book you have to read, they'll take that book and they'll have the flashlight and they'll tear through it. So I don't know, I found that a really curious question. When answering it, I found it a super curious question.
I think there's nothing wrong with telling a kid that you care about a book, that it means something to you, because look, we're adults, right? We've lived through stuff. We've had experiences they haven't. So there's nothing wrong with you sharing your passion, but it doesn't mean that they're going to share it. It just means you put that out there as, boy, I love this book. but I don't think it means you can expect, therefore, any particular kind of response. The one thing I would say is I wouldn't assume that because I like it and I'm speaking to a child that there's this absolute gap, right? There is something about the book that caused me to like it. And you can articulate that. I don't think we should worship this idea that kids are different, or maybe that maybe they see the world differently. I mean, we can say it's terrific horror, or it's very funny, or you'll learn something you never knew. I mean, there's criteria, and we can state that. But I think psychologically, sociologically, they're far more likely to respond to their peers. So.
No, I agree with this. I think there's also this idea that you develop about one. I think it's quite important in we're talking about all these how to find the perfect book or how to find great books amongst this mass of published books. But there's also the idea of when you bring a book that you read when you were a child, and then they pay attention because the book has another meaning. And especially if it's a book that the very book that you actually read from a very old edition, it's also quite important to get them to pay attention with the sort of tradition and the age and the transmission of books. And I think that no matter what the story is, they tend to react completely differently when you say, oh, actually, this was a great story that I used to read. And I think there's a book by an academic called Enchanted Hunters, in which he says that we don't read the same from the same point of view. The adult reader and the child readers, they have different visions, so that you think that you're reading the same text, but in fact the parent is using the children's book as to feed their nostalgia for childhood, whereas the child is actually using the book as a stepping stone or as a portal out of fairyland into reality. So he's reading different things to actually get out there and explore reality. But it's this place of collusion that makes the book and the experience of reading together amazing or special.
I wanted to add something to that. When my older son was in 4th grade, I read a book to him called The Tangle-Coated Horse, which was written by this woman who had been involved with the Irish Renaissance. She was friends with Yeats and Maud Gonne, etc. And it's written in English, but the sentence structure isn't English. And my son couldn't believe it because it was like a language he had never heard before, though it was English. And I think that's one thing to remember, that when we bring something to kids, even if it's not what they think they're going to want, it's a gift. We're giving them access to a world that was invisible to them before that. And I always feel, I guess, partially because of my nonfiction passion, when people say, oh, that's like school, it's going to bore them. Well, no, we're saying you're worthy of this. You're worthy of having access to this knowledge or this experience or this opening. And now that doesn't always work, but when it works, it's wonderful.
So we're talking about sharing books with children that we love, which I adore. The different ways you can bring these books to kids. I think it's important to engage them in discussion sometimes too, to better understand then what they'll love later, what might appeal to them next time you want to recommend something. So what types of questions do you think are best to ask to engage a child in discussion about a book and better understand their experience of that book without necessarily guiding them with your own interpretation? What types of things would you recommend asking to begin those discussions?
You get to go first.
I don't know, because I'm an academic, so I don't really know about these questions, but I'm very interested in not only what children read, but what they, you refer to this, what they make with the book, and what they like making or doing with the book. And it seems to me that, sometimes young kids like, especially young boys, they like books, with action, with cars, with roads, and it's quite intriguing to see that they will actually use the book and put some cars on the pages, and they like using the book as a sort of as a prop, as a decor, and it's very interested to see this phenomenon, this journal, and the way you can bring the journal in the shower, and you can step on the journal, and you can tear or you can glue pages, and as you said, I mean, it's also what fans do with the books, and if you go on Wattpad, or if you look simply on Google Image and you look at what readers do with the books, I found this phenomenon very interesting. Whether they take the books to special places, which I'll refer to in the book, or they will do certain drawings or certain sculptures according to what the book refers to. So this is something I'm interested in. What do you want to do with the book? And also where they read it. Why do you read the book? Why do you want to stay with the book? I mean, young kids sleep with books because they love them so much. They want to take them to bed. It's not just a bedtime book, it's literally a bed book. So this is, the materiality of the book, and the physical experience you have with the book is something that is very intriguing to me.
I think I'm so passionate about books because it's just an internal moment for these children to have, and they have such power with this moment. And so as a teacher, I got a kick out of seeing them engage with the book, seeing them draw, and I mean obsessively draw their favorite scene, their favorite character, their favorite gun, car, whatever. But the way they engage and take ownership of this book, and I think I found the questions kind of start from there. So okay, can you give me a book review? I mean, why should I read the book? Can you tell me, why should I read this? Who was your favorite character? So kind of put them in the position where they're teaching you something, and you get to see how they engaged with it, how they engaged with the character, what sparked their passion. And as you said, it's not something that we as adults would necessarily assume sparked it. It could be something completely random. So I think that was one of the things that I enjoyed the most as a teacher. It's definitely asking the kids the questions, but putting them in the position of power where they were doing the book reviews, they were writing commentary, they were free to say what they didn't like about the book and why, and what they would have done differently. That's one thing that's a lot of fun too. Like, what would you have changed about the book? And you see girls who want to make the character, she has to have this kind of hair. Or, you see boys who want the character to be named this and not that. So if you put the kids in the power position, they can tell you some quite interesting things about books.
I have nothing to add. Clearly it's finding out the kid's experience, that and whatever set of questions and intersections lead to finding out where the book affected them, positively, negatively, or creatively.
Coming back from Bologna, Marc, how do you think your international view, being travelers or living abroad, affects your selection of books? And what does that bring to the children you know? And what books are available to them?
Well, I would strongly say that since I live and work in America, that there is an absolute necessity to show every American kid that there's a world beyond the borders. because that is completely not self-evident to American kids. And the emphasis on multiculturalism in America is wonderful, except it tends to be national, and it tends to pretend that there aren't other ways of experiencing the world beyond the borders, even though sitting in your classroom is someone who was born elsewhere or whose parents were. And to me, it is a mandate to bring to young people the sense of possibility that comes from seeing there's a world that experiences things differently. And I think maybe that's linked to the fact that I think a mistake in books for children, especially young children, is to say we're all the same. And there's a value in that. We want to overcome prejudices and biases, etc. But we're not all the same. We have different views and different experiences and different foods and beliefs, and that's good. And I think it's really important for young people to experience that. Both of my parents were immigrants, and I think that was great. It taught me there was a world beyond the Upper West Side of Manhattan. So.
Kids have such a vivid imagination, but I found it a big challenge to share international books with children and to kind of deal with their laughter. Oh, like why is she wearing peanuts on her head? Or oh, why is she wearing this? In a situation where you have a lot of kids together, when it's one-on-one, you can definitely engage with your child and kind of have a dialogue. But I did find it a challenge in sort of a group setting to explore why things were done differently here and differently there. But it was a moment of conversation. I mean, we had to use that and look at things that we did in our culture and why maybe we did it and why it wasn't done in this culture. So I think the international aspect that I bring into helping kids select books is using it as a dialogue. Taking the moment, taking the opportunity to say, okay, yes, this is different, but why do you think that? Oh, well, maybe it's warmer in their country. Maybe it's a higher elevation, or maybe they don't have this kind of food there. And so just kind of bringing it down onto a daily level for the kids. Like, what's your daily life compared to the daily life in this book that's in an international setting? I feel like that helped, and I think that was important to them, because once you sort of bring it to her mother and father probably do this, and this is what kind of job they go to, and this is what your mother and father do, and this is how they spend their day, kind of breaking it down to a day-to-day interaction. I think that helped with the kids, and I think it was important for them. And once you sort of did that, like an everyday, ordinary thing, they accepted it, and they just, okay, let's move on with the story. And then it became not as important, they just wanted to get to the story.
I'd say that, speaking from a French point of view, in France, translation is a major aspect of children's literature, and there are roots in children's literature. Books take certain roots, and at the moment, most of, or an amazing amount of books come from the English-speaking world. And when I grew up, I was given this book, but I never read it in English. And where the wild things are, and I was terrified by this book.
Horror books, excellent.
I know, I thought it was just completely traumatic. Until 5 years ago, I read it in English for the first time. And then I discovered a completely different book. In French, it's called Max et les Maximonstres, but it never says the word monster in the text. And they changed the typography. And
Really?
Sadek was obsessed with details, and he spent 10 years writing this book. So he would have died to see that they change the title, the colours, even the layout of the.
But he must have had approval.
I don't know. I think it must have been quite
They
traumatic.
don't always.
I know, but
Um,
he had a lot of power.
Yeah, but so I then discovered that I'd been read a very different book, and I recently discovered a book. I don't know if you know.
We
this
have it in
Oh,
English.
This one. It's called. This one is written by Beatrice Alemagna, and she is Italian, I think. And she wrote this book in French, so it's called Le Merveilleux Dodu Velu Petit, which in French sounds incredibly strange. It doesn't really mean anything. So when you see the cover, you don't really know what sort of story she's trying to tell. And then I spent a holiday in England, and I realised that the book, I hope I can find you the title. Yeah. So there was a first translation that was made, and I think it's the American I don't know which one you have, but it's called The Wonderful Fluffy Little Squishy. But then in England they translated it again, and it became The Marvelous Fluffy Squishy Itty Bitty.
No, we have fluffy little squishy.
The text is completely different, and the translation sublimes the original text. But what's interesting is that she's actually writing in between languages, because she's clearly thinking in Italian, writing in French, and then the French translation, mediated to Italian, was then retranslated better in English. The story is amazing in English.
I just want to add one other thought when you mentioned about explaining to kids about difference. One set of books that I think on a younger age have tried to deal with this is through food. So there are books on bread around the world or rice around the world, and while it's limited, it does make a point. Bread is not bread. Each culture has its own way of making what kind of product it does and how it bakes it or how it uses it. And I think if kids grow up with this sense that this thing that seems familiar here, how I eat breakfast, how I go to school, can be completely different elsewhere in a nonfiction context, that can be very useful. I will say that at Bologna I saw several books that were starting to work towards world history, which I thought was interesting, that were trying to deal with history as it iterated throughout the world. What I think has to happen next is to have history as transitive, not as separate. In other words, not here's India, here's China, here's Iran, here's, etc., as let's appreciate each, but how did ideas, how did goods, how did people flow through changing each civilization as they went through? Because in fact, neither ideas, nor beliefs, nor foods, nor peoples, nor diseases are national. They've been begged, borrowed, and stolen throughout the world. And I think that would be a next place to go from appreciating that there are many kinds of ways of being to seeing how intermixed those are. And to be slightly self-advertising, that is what my wife and I did in Sugar Changed the World. We traced world history through sugar. And to just give the very 1 second version of it, sugar was very expensive in the West until 1493, when Columbus brought the first cutting to the New World. And the New World was the ideal place to grow sugar in every respect except one, which was you didn't have the manpower. And the manpower is the story of Atlantic slavery. But the story of sugar is also the story of abolition, the story of indenture, and the story of nonviolent resistance. And so within one product, there are all of these interwoven stories. And that is what I'd like to see more of, so that when we say it's a globalizing world, it's not like that happened yesterday. That's actual history. And I think that would be very good for kids to grow up with that awareness.
As we wrap up, we've talked a little bit about award lists and your favorites, and I wanted to leave people with something really concrete to take away from here, how to find the best books. I know we're all thinking of it internationally, either we live abroad, teach at international schools, work with international kids, and might be moving back. So I wanted to ask if you recommend following any award lists, and if so, which ones, or how you keep up, how you keep up with some international books, if there are any recommendations you can give as to how to keep up
Well,
with
for
some.
international books, we were in Bologna for the Hans Christian Andersen Award, which Chris Riddell was a finalist for. But I would say, and you should share some of the award lists that we used in the class. I think White Ravens is a very good list. There are quite a number of international awards. My strong suggestion about award lists is use many, because having served on an award committee, I can tell you humans are imperfect. I know this is a shock, but the fact is any committee decision is a committee decision. So look at a lot of lists and see. So there are award lists for young books, middle grade, teenage. There are award lists for fiction and nonfiction. That there are ethnically defined award lists. Just look at a lot of them, and that I think would help break your attachment to any one place.
And even as an extension of them, I tend to use the list in different ways. For instance, like I might get birthday gifts from the Newbery list because it's going to be something classic. They're going to keep the book for a couple of years. Whereas I might use a Kids' Choice Award for for a bride.
Right.
Because so you can use the list sort of for different purposes.
Although I think Rush Limbaugh won the Kids' Choice because it was absolutely a pure financial thing, and more of his books won. But anyway,
So who won the Anderson Award?
not Rush. Oh no, who?
Yeah.
Who did?
Yeah.
Oh, which illustrator? Suzanne Rotra-Werner won the illustration side, and a Chinese author whose name I can't pronounce.
It's like Wen Chen Chao.
Yeah, very well done. We had just studied him the week before, so we were very pleased. He won the, and actually the translator is British, Dr. Helen Wang. She was very gracious.
Question?
I have a question. So far, and thank you very much, I feel enlightened and reassured for any of the children who are near me. But I myself am, as I often say, child free, which means that I reach and follow children's literature for pleasure. And I've heard many wonderful, warm, supportive, incredibly wonderful things for encouraging children, bringing them aware, making them aware of what's going on in the world. But I haven't heard anything that's absolutely fun. What do you read? What would you recommend for fun? I love the Much More series, Cherub, and about the little boy who becomes a spy for his country. I am devoted to Harry Potter, which I think kind of transcends anything, because whenever you talk to people, well, I don't believe that, I can't believe you believe that, and everything, but it's something that's created a lot of conflict. And so if we can leave aside the good, noble, wonderful feelings, what's the fun of it? Because it's wonderful to discover a book, pick a book. How do you find something that isn't as, to me, dull, I hate to say it, I love shot, as Shel Silverstein, Where the Sidewalk Ends. That made no sense to me when I was growing up.
To each his own, right? I mean, there's no, you should like what you like, not. Well, first of all, I would recommend Me and Earl and the Dying Girl, which is great fun, although to be fair, some of my students each semester don't like it. But great. But the other thing, just to get back, to me, reading bomb, which is nonfiction, is fun. I read nonfiction for pleasure. And then just back to that, when you were mentioning boys, I thought you were going to say, and this is again my cause, a lot of kids, primarily boys, like facts. Facts are pleasure. And I always am annoyed when adults will say, oh, it's just facts. Well, why just? Maybe you really want to accumulate a lot of facts, and that is pleasurable to you. And so again, I think it's just a matter of there are going to be a lot of different pleasures, and that we want to be open for ourselves in refining, well, which one do you mean? Is it a mystery such as you suggested? Is it humor? Is it nonfiction? And that's just going to be taste.
And once you kind of define your fun, then you can go down a rabbit hole. Like I know I like books with girls that kick butt. And there's an endless supply of those. Once you find one and you start talking to people like, oh, I really like the Kiki Strike books. Do you have anything like the Kiki Strike books? Then they're going to put you onto the Ally Carter books. Oh, okay, well that was good, but I didn't like this and this. Do you have something that's a little bit more that? So then they might put you onto one of the Holly Black books. But and so you kind of navigate. I think you chose a perfect title. You really do navigate your way to the books that you finally come across one. When you get it in your hand, you're almost scared to start reading it.
Yes.
You know you're gonna love it so much.
That's a good
And that's what you're going for. You're going for the gold. You're going for that X on the map.
I was surprised by what you said, because I thought that would be a very French way of looking at children's literature in France, because it's so not fun. Or at least there's a way of looking at French books. I mean, a fun French book is almost too good. It's not really the word you use to describe a book for children. It's not so good if it's fun. It shouldn't really be fun. And so I was always aware, I always thought that it was more fun on the other side of the channel or on the other side of the Atlantic. And when you look at, we don't really have Dr. Seuss. It doesn't, and it's very difficult to translate. So it's difficult to translate. So we don't really have this dimension in French literature about, nonsense or fun or language flexibility.
What you do have, though, which I would throw in the mix here, is graphic novels.
Oh yeah.
And graphic novels are fun. And now they can be dark and erotic and confusing and all of that, but they are the most magnificent medium, and you guys, the French, are the best.
It's funny to say this because I have a question for you. Because
Yes.
when, it's a question for everyone.
We're moving into the question and answer.
When you reach the reading age in France, this is when graphic novels help you read, because this is where you want to read Tintin, or you want to read all these texts,
Right.
because you finally discover that you can understand what's going on. So this is what will make a 6-year-old want to read extra fast. I mean, she will get up very early to start reading. So I was actually thinking, what is the sort of book that, in England or in the States, or what sort of book for this age will make kids wake up in the morning and want to read?
Wimpy Kid,
Yeah. But before them.
I think
which is in itself a sort of graphic novel.
Yeah.
that's true.
But that's somewhat.
I think there's a slight gap though, because in France, kids
You wanna
are
have a-
taught to read together in a specific class, whereas in US culture, and I think UK, kids are usually taught to read at home or quite early. So you'll have 3-year-olds that read and 4-year-olds. So their engagement with books starts at a much different level. You don't, I can see it, like in France, just got, like, we're all here together, and like now we can just break out of the gate and read. Whereas in the US, I mean, they're picking up books and they're reading Dr. Seuss. I mean, I love Green Eggs and Ham.
Yeah.
And the Cat in the Hat
Yeah.
comes. I mean, so we don't have that waiting to do it.
Well, there's actually this links to something. Dr. Seuss first published in '57 in the same year as the I Can Read series at Harper. Why? Baby boom, lots of kids, etc. And that whole step into reading, there's another whole series called that, and the I Can Read books are in effect that transition. What's happened in America is this insane form of putting numbers and levels on books, where kids are in this kind of terrible confetti of letters and numbers about where they're supposed to be as readers, which parents actually believe means something. And poor librarians have to put A, B, R, on their shelves as if a kid actually was that, as opposed to someone who reads this and that and the other. So unfortunately, that good idea to present that way into reading through Dr. Seuss or through I Can Read has now, while there are still good books, has fallen afoul of this really obsessive levels, which are also, by the way, completely incommensurate. So levels from one book have nothing to do with levels from another, which is even worse for parents, because if you actually believe it, you now, my kid's a 3, but wait, he's reading a 2, but now he's reading a 4.
We're giggling because Kirsty's project last summer as an intern here was to reorganize our collection of I Can Read books, which were 4 shelves of random levels, into something easier to browse, which meant a sequence of levels, and the publishers are, one's at 1 and the same level of text in another is level 3.
It's completely, it's because each publisher does it for itself by its own criteria. There are no universal criteria. There are, but no one really does them. And so what you need, I can tell you, and I say this to all my students, you, the librarian, have to develop the interpretive guide so you can tell your parents a Penguin 1 is a Scholastic 0. I'm not kidding. I mean, because Scholastic is trying to sell to every kid in America, so they'll put one word on a page, and Penguin is trying to sell to carriage trade parents, so they're going to put more words on a page, and so you need this kind of reader's guide to make sense of the chaos.
And you can come here too, because we've done it for you mostly, Kirsty.
Well, I've been realizing that between the books that I loved as a kid and the ones that maybe have come out in the last 10 years, I've had kids, that I have this big gap in my knowledge. And I was wondering if there was a way to recommend, other than asking our wonderful local librarian about how to find things that have fallen through the cracks, so maybe ones that aren't on the awards list, find the hidden gems.
For what age? For what kids?
For me.
For you to know for your
No,
kid.
for me to read them myself because I like
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
You could look through the Hornbook Guide. Basically, the way the Hornbook Guide works is if the book gets a 1 or a 2, 1 it'll get a star. Star in any publication means in the view of that publication, it's a necessary purchase.
And you can still go back and look at the older catalogs.
Yes. 2 means it's worthy of being reviewed in the magazine, but not necessarily a star. And then after that, 3, 4, 5, whatever. And I would browse. I mean, again, because the numbering system isn't perfect. You may pick up a 4 and say it's the best thing ever, but at least it will give you a way to look. Or you could look. Kirkus also has files. There you have to subscribe.
Does the American Library subscribe?
You can,
With their membership, can we?
my tool that I use when I'm looking into whether we're going to get something is to log into Novelist, which we have as a digital resource from home. And it's got, it's wonderful because you can see all these different opinions from Publishers Weekly, Kirkus, School Library Journal, and
So if I go to the main website, And then
you can log into the digital databases from the main website, and other people have these resources in Paris. I think we might be the only one. But you log into the databases and select EBSCO and then go into Novelist, and there you can search for a book and see all of the reviews complete there, and see Kirkus gave it a star, and Publishers Weekly gave it a star, but School Library Journal didn't say anything. So that makes me curious more than anything.
I should add that a star in meaning necessary purchase doesn't necessarily mean great book. It means the Venn diagram intersection between high need and high quality. So you could have an extremely high quality book that they feel no one's going to read. You could have a book that hugely fits a need that isn't that good. So that's what that means.
And the last lines are often interesting if you really want to
Right.
skim, because they'll say, great for people who need to fill their collections with some new Christmas books, or a really valuable purchase for any child or adult. and there's where you see, oh, that might be one I find.